You're watching MetroCast Channel 10. I'm Elisa. Thanks for joining me on GAB with Elisa Profiles. We have a great story for you today. We're going to profile a very interesting gentleman in Southern Maryland. We're also going to profile some of the history. And when I say history, I mean history of Southern Maryland. We're going to talk to Dr. Stephen Godfrey, who's the paleontologist at the Calvert Marine Museum, and we're going to look at some of the history in Calvert County, St. Mary's County, and Southern Maryland. We'll do that in a moment, so grab a cup of tea, kick back, and join us in just a moment. You're watching the MetroCast Channel 10.
Leonardtown, a most convenient place for shopping, dining, or even just wandering.
Leonardtown, a most entertaining place for things to do, sights to see, and fun for everyone.
Leonardtown, a most relaxing place for a quick visit, a lazy afternoon, or a long weekend.
Watch Leonardtown, a most convenient place. A new program exclusively on MetroCast Channel 10, brought to you by Dan Burris's Old Town Insurance.
Hi, I'm Susan with Chesapeake Pet Resort and Day Spa in Hollywood, and I'm here with Rex in our big play yard. And we love using MetroCast Channel 10, and we've been on the Best Buy show, and it's been a great marketing tool for us. Rex agrees, and several of our friends out here. And we encourage everyone to check out Channel 10 and utilize the services with the Best Buy show.
Best Buy's works.
Welcome back to GAB with Elisa Profiles. We have a really interesting show today. We are going to profile Dr. Stephen Godfrey, who is the paleontologist at the Calvert Marine Museum. We're also going to profile the history of Southern Maryland as it relates way back in history. But before we get started, let's talk to Dr. Godfrey. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
Now, let's talk a little bit about paleontology. I don't think a lot of people connect paleontology and Southern Maryland. So tell us a little bit about what that means as far as the Calvert Marine Museum and yourself.
So paleontology is the study of prehistoric life. And the Department of Paleontology exists at the Calvert Marine Museum because of the presence of Calvert cliffs.
Okay.
So those are prehistoric sediments that were deposited between about 18 and 8 million years ago, when global climates were warmer. And so if you have warmer climate, you have less ice at the North Pole, less ice at the South Pole. You melt that ice and you raise the level of the water in the oceans. And that water flooded over Southern Maryland. And the rivers that are presently flowing into the Chesapeake Bay and the Atlantic Ocean were flowing into that ancient sea that covered much of the Atlantic coastal plain. And so as those sediments were being deposited on the bottom of the ocean, there were organisms that were living in the sea, and it's the remains of those animals that we're now finding along Calvert Cliffs as the cliffs erode back. Those fossils that are entombed in that layer cake become exposed.
Now, when we toured the museum earlier today, you showed us a relief that is just incredible. It's painted by a resident artist at the museum, and it shows the different layers of history as they are seen in Calvert Cliffs. You can see a layer of sediment that has a lot of shells, seashells, and then you see a layer that doesn't have so much, and that represents time frames, right?
It does. It represents the passage of time, but more importantly, it represents different prehistoric environments that existed here in Southern Maryland. So the level of the water in the Atlantic Ocean didn't remain at a consistent depth. It fluctuated as over the millions of years global climates changed. And so if you could time-lapse that 10 million year block of time that's represented by the sediments preserved in the cliffs, you would see the ocean moving back and forth over Southern Maryland. And
excuse me for interrupting. One of the things that you mentioned is back in that time frame, Calvert County and St. Mary's County were approximately 200 feet underwater, right?
Yes, that would be at about the maximum global warm period.
Okay.
So we would have had 200 feet of water above us. So you can imagine the creatures that are now preserved along Calvert Cliffs were swimming around in that marine environment.
That is what is so interesting to me. And we are going to talk more about some of those creatures and some of the behaviors and what have you that we've learned from the fossils. But before we go into that, let's talk a little bit about you. Where are you originally from? How did you end up here?
I was born in Canada.
Okay.
And lived there until I moved to the United States. My schooling was done in Canada, so I lived in Quebec just north of Vermont. And about 25 years ago, I moved from Quebec out to Alberta, which is north of Montana. And I was doing research and studying dinosaurs and actually doing a lot of exhibit work. I was assembling dinosaur skeletons for museums around the world. I just loved doing the artwork relating to prehistoric animals. So I would do life restorations of extinct animals, and carve the missing bones of dinosaurs so that if a museum wanted to reassemble the full skeleton, I could do that for them. And then this position became available about 14 years ago, and I applied for it, and I was the very successful and very fortunate, rather, candidate.
So you've been here at the Calvert Marine Museum for 14 years.
Yes. Yeah.
What excites you? Because I really still am having a hard time wrapping my mind around the fact that there are enough fossils or creatures, what have you, in this area to really support what you do. What is it about this area, and how robust is it in terms of history?
So my mandate is really very simple. It's to collect, preserve, and interpret the fossils along Calvert Cliffs. And you would think that after collecting for about 150 years, that we would know all there is to know about all the fossils from along Calvert Cliffs, and that's just not the situation. We're still learning new things. There are untold trillions of fossils preserved along the cliffs. Now, most of those are microfossils, things that you would examine microscopically, or they're seashelled creatures, but there are a lot of other larger animals, and that's my area of interest. And what excites me most is when we find a fossil that, in addition to our interest in the fossil for its own sake, it has evidence of interaction with other animals. And so we get a bit of prehistoric behaviors preserved in the fossil record.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I know that that's some of the things that we're going to talk about here in just a moment. And you can tell that's the part that really excites you. It's interesting to learn about the animals, but it's really interesting to learn how they relate to their environment and to other animals, because that tells a fuller story. Because none of us, even in this age, are islands unto ourselves. We don't just get through life. We interact, or what have you. And you have some wonderful stories to tell us.
So it's like CSI paleontology. We're presented with a bit of a mystery, right? And we try to extract as much information from the fossil as possible. And some are easier to do than others, and others have really interesting stories to tell. And it's that bigger picture that allows us to flesh out prehistoric life.
All right, well, we're going to do some of that fleshing out, some of that CSI work. We'll do that in just a moment. We'll be back with more of Gab with Elisa Profiles with Dr. Stephen Godfrey, the paleontologist at the Calvert Marine Museum. We'll be back in a moment. You're watching MetroCast Channel 10.
Turn us on at www.phoenixintermediate.com.
Being your best is all about how you feel inside and out. If you feel good, you look good. Hi, I'm Dawn Campbell. Join me on MetroCast Channel 10 for Be Your Best. I'll show you creative ways to dress for success, give you quick health and fitness tips, and daily ideas for living the life you were meant to live. Be Your Best airs weekdays exclusively on MetroCast Channel 10 and is brought to you by Fitz Auto Mall.